welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to have back on our friend Glenn Kirschner, former 30-year federal prosecutor, served in the U.S. Army and JAG Corps. You see him all the time as a legal analyst on MSNBC and NBC News. Of course, his YouTube channel, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner, wildly popular. Glenn, good to see you, my friend.
Hey, great to see you, Dean.
So we are getting there. We have a lot of things happening. We're going to have finally, likely, the Trump sentencing in the middle of next month. We'll have you on before that, I hope. But I found this really curious. Donald Trump has filed a notice through his lawyer to sue DOJ for $100 million, saying the search of his crime lair, which was approved by a federal magistrate, was, quote, political persecution, clear intent to engage in political persecution, and unacceptable intrusion, is highly offensive to a reasonable person. And now this is just ridiculous. What's your reaction to this?
Yeah, so Trump's newly acquired lawyer, apparently, they're just lining up to be sanctioned, has filed what's called a notice of intent to sue the federal government, the Department of Justice. And in some more breaking news, I actually intend to win the 100-meter dash, a gold medal in the 2028 LA Olympics. So I can run really fast. So this is, to use a legal term, a bunch of horse shit. And here's why. First of all, you generally can't sue the federal government. You can, but it's really difficult to do. Why? Because the federal government, its employees, its officers, I know because I was one for 30 years, enjoy a healthy dose of what's called sovereign immunity, right? As long as we are doing our work within the scope of our official duties, we can't be sued. If I were a prosecutor and I could be sued every time somebody disliked some prosecutorial decision I made, I would do nothing but defend myself in court all day, every day. So I actually think it makes sense to make it very difficult to sue the federal government, federal officers, federal employees. But here's the thing. There's the Federal Tort Claims Act. Now, what the hell is a tort? A tort is just when one person injures another wrongfully, injures their person, injures them financially. So, Dean, if you and I were in a contract and I wrongfully breached the contract, I refuse to hold up my end of the bargain, you could sue me, because that would be a tort where one person wrongfully injures the person or the financial prospects of another. So under the Federal Tort Claims Act, you can try to sue the federal government. You have to give notice, and then the federal government has 6 months to respond and say whether they're going to waive their sovereign immunity and allow themselves to be sued. Of course, the answer here is no. The federal government will not allow itself to be sued because it was enforcing the laws of our nation against Donald Trump. So 6 months from now, we're not even going to hear about this again. Donald Trump announced that he's going to sue, he intends to sue the Department of Justice for a malicious prosecution, for a witch hunt down at Mar-a-Lago, so he can go to his hate rallies. He's got a rigorous campaign schedule, one a week. So he can go to his hate rallies and he can grift his base saying, I'm suing the Department of Justice. So if you have $5 left that you haven't already pulled from your pocket and sent to me, do it now. That's what this is about. There is no legitimate cause of action because, as you say, a federal judge issued a search warrant. And what did they find? Evidence of crime at Mar-a-Lago, the classified documents. Donald Trump refused to return, and that's why he was being prosecuted. So this is a bunch of Donald Trump nonsense.
I agree. But Glenn, we'll do like a law school class. Let's change this into hypothetical here. What if Donald Trump wins and then he controls DOJ and he goes, consent to it and then pay me $100 million? He could do that, couldn't he, now, with his absolute immunity? I mean, this is the insanity of the nation we live in today.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Because when Kamala Harris wins the presidency come November, we're still going to have a corrupt Supreme Court, at least 6 radical right-wing members of the Supreme Court to contend with, because they've gone a long way to destroying the rule of law and enabling a criminal president. Kamala Harris is not going to take advantage of the power of lawlessness that the Supreme Court has bestowed upon presidents, but maybe a future Republican president will. So no, our battle, our struggle will not be over to sort of rebuild the rule of law in our nation and restore, the Constitution after the Supreme Court ruled some of it was unconstitutional. But you're right. God forbid Donald Trump wins and is actually sworn in. He will have free reign to commit any and all crimes against the United States. He could just pilfer the U.S. Treasury, I mean, never mind, oh, I have to file a suit and then I have to tell DOJ to lay down so I can win damages. No. He's not going to need to do all that. He can pilfer the Treasury, pardon everybody that he directed to do so, and everybody goes home the richer for it, other than the American people. So, that's why we've got to vote in November to make sure Donald Trump can't finish what he started on January 6th.
And then speaking of the rule of law going out the window, and it really is like reading about another time in history where you have corrupt judges. Judge Cannon dismisses the Trump case, saying special counsel was illegally appointed by the Justice Department. And I was looking at the notes. You were on actually just days before that. It did not happen yet. So I never got your reaction. What's your reaction? I have a sense of what your reaction is, but what is your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, my reaction is she ruled in a way that no judge, no court has ever ruled. Every time this issue was raised and litigated in both trial courts and appellate courts, judges ruled that special counsel is lawful and constitutional. And we have been using some version of special counsel, independent counsel, special prosecutor, dating back to the 1800s in the United States. So this was her doing another unlawful favor for Donald Trump. I'm convinced she'll be reversed unanimously by the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, just as she was previously when she abused her judicial discretion in Donald Trump's favor. And the panel that unanimously reversed her and ruled that she abused her discretion to do a favor for Donald Trump, they were 3 Republican appointed judges, 2 appointed by Trump. So listen, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals is going to get it right. They're going to reverse. And then, of course, Donald Trump is going to try to bubble it up to the Supreme Court. I hope they can't get enough votes to accept it for review in the Supreme Court. We only know that Clarence Thomas wrote that little love letter in his separate concurring opinion in the absolute immunity case. That was a love letter to Donald Trump that he CC'd to Judge Cannon and said, hey, Aileen, just dismiss the case. I got your back. The reason that's a real problem, Dean, is not because I think Trump will win on this issue at the end of the day, but it will make it more difficult for the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals to say she abused her discretion. Why? Because she's going to be able to say, oh, wait a minute, a Supreme Court justice said I could do it, which is BS, but she will have the cover of that separate concurring opinion.
And I'm chatting with our friend Glenn Kirschner. So, Glenn, let's talk about the January 6th case, which has now been returned to Judge Chutkan in D.C. There's a little delay going on now that she granted. Jack Smith wanted the delay, one of the first times he did. But so people understand, where are we now in terms of that case?
So we are going to be back in court in September after a 3-week delay that I firmly believe, Dean, because I've been in Jack Smith's shoes, not as a special counsel, but begging and pleading the bureaucrats at the Department of Justice to get off the dime and give me the authority to do what I'm trying to do. And I would have to walk into court sometimes and say, Judge, as you know, the government speaks with one voice, and I need some more time before I can set a trial date. And the judge would pull me aside later and say, Glenn, I know what you were saying. You were saying DOJ won't get off its ass and do what needs to be done. Bingo, Your Honor. This was years later. But everybody understands that the bureaucracy at the Department of Justice is glacial sometimes, and even global warming doesn't help speed that glacier up. So I think that's why Jack Smith had to ask for 3 more weeks, not because he wasn't ready, but because he couldn't get the answers that he needed from other components at the Department of Justice with which he is required to coordinate under the special counsel regulations. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get into court. I'll be in court watching this down here in D.C., and Judge Chutkan is going to begin to have hearings. And what she's going to have to do, Dean, is go through every single criminal act that is alleged in the indictment of Donald Trump for trying to overturn the 2020 election results, and have a hearing and decide whether each and every act is entitled to immunity because it was an official act of the president, or it was unofficial, it was private conduct, it was the conduct of a candidate. She's going to get those calls right. I actually think she's going to be very forward-leaning, in my opinion, in what she decides is not official conduct of a president and should not enjoy immunity from prosecution. But then, of course, what happens? We're back on the appellate ladder where we have to go to the D.C. Federal Circuit Court of Appeals, then to the Supreme Court. And, who knows where the Supreme Court will ultimately come down. But We will at least, Dean, begin to see the evidence for ourselves
Right.
reported out of that courtroom. And that's going to be really important for us to see, because remember, it was almost exclusively Republican witnesses who testified before the grand jury about the crimes of Donald Trump. So this is going to be some really valuable information for the voters.
It will be interesting because people keep talking about this mini trial that will happen perhaps on the issues, and it'll get in the media again. We'll discuss it. It'll be even closer to the election. There's not going to be a trial before the election. That they were able to do what their job is, protect the nominee of their party, the Republicans, and that's the way it has to be viewed. I mean, Glenn, when you take a step back and look at the Supreme Court, these are horrific decisions. I mean, this decision about absolute immunity I believe, it will go down in the annals as one of the worst Supreme Court decisions, dangerous Supreme Court decision.
Yeah, no, I feel like this opinion, which is titled Trump versus the United States of America, aptly titled, because it really is Donald Trump versus the United States of America, will go down with Dred Scott, will go down with Plessy versus Ferguson, will go down with Korematsu, all of which have been relegated to the racist, dustbin of history. And, this is almost as bad, just in another way. And I do believe it will fall at some point. How quickly it will fall is an open question, but it will fall, because we can't endorse lawlessness in the chief executive of the United States, because if we do, eventually we're done, right? We become a banana republic eventually. And so and let me add this, Dean, because I think it's interesting, and I haven't heard a lot of mention of it. If the case goes back up to the Supreme Court on Judge Cannon dismissing the Mar-a-Lago prosecution because special counsel's not a thing, remember, there has been a formal request made by Senators Whitehouse and Wyden of the Department of Justice that a special counsel be appointed to investigate the suspected crimes of Clarence Thomas, and I believe Alito too. So guess what? They are conflicted out. They can't sit on the question of whether special counsel is a thing or not, because there's a request that one be used against them to criminally investigate them. This will be another indication, if they refuse to recuse, and I assume they will, that this Supreme Court is just out of control, corrupt beyond all repair. This code of ethics is not going to fix this. And These two men need to be investigated in an impeachment inquiry in Congress, and they need to be criminally investigated by the Department of Justice.
Because they're not going to recuse themselves. We know that, like Glenn is saying. Do you support the idea of expanding the Supreme Court?
I do. We have expanded all other levels of the federal bench. We've added federal trial court judges. We've added appellate court judges over the years. Why? We're norming for the increased population and the increased caseloads that federal judges are laboring under. Of course, we should increase the number of Supreme Court justices, and there should be term limits, and there should be a mandatory code of ethics. Why should they be the only federal government officials who operate in an ethics-free environment? That's insanity.
I don't even know what the genesis for that is. Like, why would you say everyone else, here's the ethics rules, but the people at the top, you don't have any? I don't even know why that would have happened. Like, it makes no sense to me. Like how we got there, how they carved it out.
They believe that's the first step on using as a ruse ethical violations to dislodge judges for ideological reasons. I think that is where I don't buy the argument.
Right.
Everybody should be required to be ethical if you're a damn public servant.
I have to be ethical here doing a radio show. I mean, you have to be ethical doing your stuff on MSNBC. We're held to higher standards. I'm chatting with our friend Glenn Kirschner. So, Glenn, I want to talk about something we've talked about before, and that the fact is Donald Trump. Look, he's not just running to win. He's running to stay out of prison. He understands it. All these cases we're talking about, classified documents case will be reinstated, and Donald Trump will very likely be convicted there of serious felonies. January 6th case, it's very likely some part of the 4 counts will continue forward. If he's convicted, he will get jail time. So it's very dangerous. And so I look at what he's doing now through that prism. And, on Sunday, he was claiming the crowds at Vice President Harris's events were AI, and the media kind of stopped there. And when you read down what he was really getting at, and I'll just read it for people. He said about Harris, she's a cheater. This is the way the Democrats win elections, by cheating. They're even worse in the ballot box. She should be disqualified because the creation of fake image is election interference. Anyone who does that will cheat at anything. And he's feeling the stress. The polls are bad now. We're not. The reason he's been calm about this, he was leading in the polls against Biden. That's done. I think he's going to get more dangerous to me. And this is more than delegitimizing the loss that he's going to have. It's, again, priming the base for potential violence. That's my concern. Where do you come down on this?
Oh, I believe he is going to get more dangerous. I believe he's going to continue to inspire his supporters to violence. And all of that is of enormous consequence. However, I believe that his opportunity to either steal the election or lodge any kind of a legitimate challenge against the election's results are diminishing by the day. And for purposes of the long-term health and vitality of our democracy, that is what's most important. I don't want to see pockets of violence erupt because Donald Trump, suggests his supporters should take up arms and contest the election results. But that is a short-term concern that I'm confident law enforcement and, if need be, the military, under certain circumstances where that's authorized, will put down, will handle. The Biden administration will handle the eruptions of violence if they occur. But I really don't think, think back to when the Supreme Court was perfectly positioned to hand Donald Trump the election win. That was 2020, because there were 60 to 65 cases in federal court. The Supreme Court could have grabbed hold of any of them, taken them for review, and pronounced, based on some trumped up reason, no pun intended, that Donald Trump is the winner. They didn't do it. Now, They're doing a lot of crazy stuff now with the absolute immunity, and insurrectionists can be on the ballot and all that. But I don't think that is all necessarily Trump-specific Supreme Court insanity. I think they have this expansive view of the powers that the chief executive should have, Democrat and Republican. And I don't want to give them too much credit here, but I still believe, and my wife and I debate this all the time, and she's more often right than I am. I said I don't think they're going to overturn Roe v. Wade, and my wife Nilufar said, "Oh, just watch them." And of course, she was right. I don't think they're going to hand the election to Trump when he loses in a landslide. I just don't. So I think the long-term prospects for the viability of our democracy are good.
Look, we all want to agree with you. And in 2020, there was that Hail Mary lawsuit that they brought Ken Paxton from Texas. They could have heard the case, and they didn't do that. So while, yes, Alito and Thomas will vote for hearing anything Trump wants, I don't think the others want to see democracy. Look, they're defending Trump and protecting him, but I don't know if Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett and even Kavanaugh really want him in there with absolute immunity, because he could dissolve the Supreme Court. He could do whatever. He could arrest them. They know how bad he is. They've lived in the same world we do. And I do think there's a sense of it's the bigger proclamation of all presidents going forward is the protection they should have. We will see. Last couple of things. I'm chatting with my friend Glenn Kirschner. Glenn, it was very interesting. The Arizona grand jury, we learned, wanted to indict Donald Trump, and they didn't. And you were tweeting about this. Now that Jenna Ellis, Trump's former lawyer, has flipped, could they go back and indict Donald Trump for crimes similar to Georgia crimes, but in this case, Arizona?
Yes. Full stop. Right. So she was one of Donald Trump's dirty lawyers during the previous election challenge. She's indicted in Georgia, and she flipped and is cooperating with Georgia state prosecutors. Rudy, her partner in the legal crimes they were committing, he has been criminally indicted in both Georgia and Arizona, and she has flipped yet again. She flipped when she was given a non-pros agreement. So they said, listen, the information you have, which you've told us about, and we've audio recorded, that's the reporting, is so valuable, we are willing to give you a pass on your crimes as long as you testify truthfully against Trump, Giuliani, Mark Meadows, and the other co-defendants in the Arizona prosecution. And she agreed to do that. So whereas it felt like a little bit of a dagger through this old prosecutor's heart when I saw the Arizona grand jury wanted to indict Trump because they believed there was enough evidence presented to them by the prosecutors, I fully understand why prosecutors would say, hold up, not yet. And then they continue to investigate. They now have a really important cooperating witness in Jenna Ellis. I hope now is the time and they revisit that and they say, okay, now we can move out on an indictment of Donald Trump. That's my hope based on the evidence.
And look at the Georgia case, which we don't even talk about anymore. It's just on hold. It's been paused formally. And I wonder if this Republicans are doing this to give Trump, the leader of their party, a clean shot to the election. And after the election, they'll go, okay, pause is over. And he loses, which he should lose. And we are going to work hard to make sure he loses. They let the case go forward. But I mean, are you shocked that case has just stopped? Like nothing's happened. The appellate division in Georgia, whatever their appellate division is, said case stopped.
Yeah, well, they set a very leisurely pace for the appeal of the decision by Judge McAfee that Fani Willis is not conflicted off the case. She can continue to prosecute it. It's inexplicable to me why they would set that on such a leisurely track, but they have. I'm not prepared to leap to the conclusion that, well, that equals the judges on the Georgia Court of Appeals are doing it for political reasons. I have heard that they often set these very elongated timetables in their appeals. So listen, as long as Donald Trump loses the election, then Donald Trump will spend the rest of his miserable life in court being prosecuted and ultimately serving prison terms, one after the other. So our job is to just get to the polls and numbers too big to rig and too real to steal, and then everything else will sort itself out.
He will spend the rest of his unnatural life in a prison cell somewhere, which he should. And we don't have to get into it. I could see a scenario where Biden pardons Hunter and pardons Trump on the federal stuff because that's the kind of person Joe Biden is. But I hope not, because at the same time, he understands the threat is. The last thing, and we don't talk about politics with you, so this is not political. This is more about your experience. You served in the United States Army, and we have the vice presidential candidate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, served 24 years. He could have retired at 20. He stayed for 4 more years there. And as a member of Congress, his number one priority was veterans benefits, helping the veterans. He continued to fight for his troops, even though he wasn't there. And he's being smeared by J.D. Vance, who served 4 years, and that's commendable. And he was a combat journalist. He never actually was in combat, but still, that's more than most people do. So I'm not going to belittle that. It really is. He volunteered, served in the Marine Corps, great stuff. But the idea of demeaning Tim Walz, who served 24 years in the U.S. National Guard, is outrageous to me, the state National Guard.
Yeah, it shows that these people have no bottom. But look, Donald Trump mocked, made fun of, demeaned John McCain. And this is just all Donald Trump's little rats that follow the Pied Piper doing the same. You don't demean somebody who served 24 years, who was deployed multiple times, and then who retired, and then months later his unit got deployed again. I mean, this stolen valor nonsense is, I don't want to say as low as it gets, because they also did revoke women's constitutional privacy rights. That's pretty damn low in my book.
Sure.
And Donald Trump mocks the disabled and biracial folks. So they just get lower and lower and lower. But look, you got in Tim Walz, you've got Coach Walz, you've got social studies teacher Walz, you've got somebody who in the 90s stepped up and agreed to, step into a cause that was not quite as popular back in the 90s, taking up for folks in the LGBTQ community who were, put upon and disadvantaged and mocked and demeaned and discriminated against. He said, no, this is not right. Let me step in and try to help this situation. I mean, you look at the father he is. You look at he was the chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee and fought like hell for veterans' rights.
Yeah.
There's nothing that doesn't recommend this man to be the vice president and indeed the president, compared to J.D. Vance, who not long ago said Trump is Hitler, and now he's saying Trump's my man. Well, either you were a liar back then, you're a liar now, or you have the world's worst judgment. The man is the most pathetic kind of chameleon. So listen, this is disgusting and despicable and exactly what we would expect of today's Republican Party.
Yeah, and very last thing, the last minute here. You had the cruise with Frank Figliuzzi. I had Frank on numerous times. You talked about, I saw the pictures. It looked like fun. Was it a fun cruise? You have a good time? Was it called Justice Matters cruise, or was it Frank?
No, it was
a
sort of justice-centric Mediterranean cruise that Frank and I co-hosted. And it was a group of these great folks who are dedicated to democracy and decency and the rule of law and diversity and ethics in government. It was inspirational. We had 4 events on the ship, but frankly, it was just one event from start to finish, because I think the ship had a max of 1,200 people. It was maxed out. They weren't all there signing up for our part of the cruise, and the entire 10-day cruise, it was just us spending time with these folks. Even, they would see us. They're like, come on, let's sit down, let's talk, let's have lunch, let's have drinks. And I was so inspired by these people, and we had such a good time. And again, when I retired from the Department of Justice, if you had told me I would be co-hosting a justice-themed cruise with Frank Figluzzi, I would have said, you're on crack. And yet, here we are.
Well, it looked like fun. I haven't had Frank on since. We'll get Frank's side to it. But Glenn, my friend, it's always great seeing you. Sign up for Glenn's YouTube channel, Justice Matters with Glenn Kirschner. Follow him on Twitter and everything else. And I look forward to seeing you in a few weeks in D.C. at your Justice Matters event in Washington, D.C.
Can't wait to see you, Dean.
Take care, my friend. Have a